This is FLOSS Weekly. I'm Doc Searls, and this week, Dan Lynch and I talk with Dave Taht. Dave is the king of bufferbloat and has done so much to make the internet work faster and better for everywhere. Billions of people benefit from his work, all open source, all for the most part, not paid for, but he does great work. But the interesting thing this time, because he's been on before, is that we go into music and we go into Starlink and we go into a whole lot of stuff, and it's conferencing and forms of conferencing, open source conferencing that I hadn't heard of before that are supposed to be really good. But the main thing is music is a focus this time, and that's something in common with last week, actually. It's going to be really good, and that is coming up next.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is FLOSS Weekly, episode 745, recorded Wednesday, August 16th, 2023. The Buffer Bloke. This episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Discourse, the online home for your community. Discourse makes it easy to have meaningful conversations and collaborate anytime, anywhere. Visit discourse.org/twit to get 1 month free on all self-serve plans.
Listeners of this program get an ad-free version if they're members of Club TWiT. $7 a month gives you ad-free versions of all of our shows, plus membership in the Club TWiT Discord, a great clubhouse for TWiT listeners. And finally, the TWiT Plus feed, with shows like Stacy's Book Club, The Untitled Linux Show, The Giz Fizz, and more. Go to twit.tv/clubtwit, and thanks for your support.
Good whenever it is, wherever you are. I am Doc Searls, and this is FLOSS Weekly. This week, joined by Dan Lynch himself in his lair in Liverpool.
I like that you call it a lair. I do like that. That's very cool.
Yeah, actually, Simon calls his place a lair, I think.
Does he? Well, okay.
Yeah.
There you go. I'm stealing Simon's thunder. Yeah, it's great to be back. Thanks, Doc.
Yeah. The last we had you on, I think you were the guest.
I was. Yeah.
And I've been in the part just to promote another podcast. I think I mentioned it, 500, the history of rock music and 500 songs, but like around episodes 105 to 107 or something. It's all about Liverpool. And
okay.
Not just the Beatles, Jerry and the Pacemakers and the Searchers and a whole bunch of others. And I didn't know that like doubling up guitars and forcing the Beatles to go 12-string was a Searchers thing. And
I think
the
so.
two lead singers who never got along and still don't get along.
Did it cover the 80s stuff like Frankie Goes to Hollywood? Because that had a huge impact.
It's not up there yet. It's he forecast a lot of this. It's going to take him 10 years to do the whole thing.
Oh wow. Okay.
Because
he's going to need a bit of time.
It's like 5,000 songs in a way, but it's deeply interesting. A good show. So Dave Taht is our guest today. He's a repeat performer himself. And you said you've done some studying. Is there anything that stands out for you before we?
Lots of stuff. Show? Obviously, we talked a bit about the whole music angle. So we're going to get into some of that, I think, which would be really interesting. I've actually got old school notes here. I wrote notes.
Oh, really?
But then I almost left them downstairs, and I realized the folly of non-digital notes when I was like, oh no, they're downstairs. So I had to run down and get them. But yeah, I look forward to talking about that. OpenWRT, I know kind of relates. And as I was looking through picking stuff up in the studio and putting stuff back together, I found this. Remember these guys?
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's your...
WRT 54G.
Oh, yeah, well,
the reason we have OpenWRT. I found this. It's a bit dusty. It's a bit dusty. But I'd love to see if this thing still works. I may even do something with that. Yeah. So yeah, it'd be good to talk about some of that sort of stuff as well. So I bought props with me.
I still have one of those in the closet too. Maybe one that Dave gave me. I'm not
Every
sure.
geek should have one, at least one.
And so let me introduce our guest, he's been, I think, on here like 3 or 4 times by now. Dave Taht. I'll just read off the Wikipedia because it's great. An American network engineer, musician, lecturer, asteroid explorer, internet activist, chief executive officer, Tech Libre, or whatever it says under his thing for those watching later in a moment. Co-founded the bufferbloat. LibreQOS. Okay, LibreQOS. I began the bufferbloat thing with Jim Geddes. Runs the CiroWirt and make Wi-Fi fast sub projects. Referees the bufferbloat related mailing lists and related research activities. He also has a great Starlink list, which I'm on as well. And has done things that are good for the internet and have benefited billions of people. Mostly without remuneration, so, which is why he lives on a boat with a very, very large keyboard, I see. And so it's off to one side. So how you doing, Dave?
It's really great to see you, Doc. And thanks for having me on the show once again.
So Dan, why don't you just jump in with your queued up things, maybe even starting with that modem, that hotspot.
Yeah,
now cold hotspot.
Yeah, now called a hotspot. I mean, I was intrigued to see that this has got the latest 2.4 gigahertz technology, apparently.
I remember that.
Front, so I look forward to seeing how good that is. We'll see how that goes. So OpenWRT, that was a big thing for me. I was having a look at some of Dave's blog today and some of the interesting stuff on there. So much stuff to talk about. Obviously, bufferbloat is the thing that a lot of people will associate, I would think, with you. But just for the benefit of people who maybe aren't as clued up on it, what do you mean when you say bufferbloat, and how did the project aim to deal with that?
I'm looking forward today to talking more about music, because that's where my story began. Okay. All I wanted to do in 1991 was to plug my guitar into a wall and play with my drummer across town, because he would never make a gig. And and the technology required to do that more or less existed in 1991, but we seem to keep going backwards until recently, and in part because of the bufferbloat problem. And what that basically was and is and remains is that we have a very variable data rate that has X amount of buffering in it, which is usually far too much for interactivity. So even if you and I were to try to play together and we were in the same state today, it probably wouldn't work very well, in part due to the bufferbloat problem. I've written so extensively about it that I would really encourage people to hit Wikipedia for it. The issue is that the issue is solved. We fixed it in 2012, and it's just taken 12 bloody years to start seeing it roll out in quantity to the average person. There's a bunch of fixes, RFC 8290, QCODL, and stuff. Is that vague enough for you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I read that the stuff was incorporated was upstreamed back into the OpenWRT project in like 2014. You guys finished what you were doing, so we're talking nearly 10 years ago now. How come we still aren't? Is there a problem with ISPs or what's going on? How come we're not seeing this promoted to end users as such?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I started doing embedded Linux in 1998, before it was really a thing. And at the time, we cared a lot about keeping up with kernels because we had to. And we cared a lot about keeping software up to date because we had to. And I figured that the cycle time from a new kernel release to something that shipped would be a couple of years. As the stuff has got more and more mature, the cycle time from a new FLOSS kernel to where it gets deployed, it seems to be extending out to 5 to 7 years. And we, of course, have a billions and billions install base. OpenWRT is doing a beautiful job of keeping up with developments in the kernel. And everybody that tracks that, has had this stuff for 10 years. But, just the other day, I was talking to someone that had a 7-year-old version of OpenWRT that they wanted to add a couple features to. And at some point, did anybody on the show still run Windows 7? Because it's probably the case. At some point, you have to upgrade the whole operating system. The warts you have there, I don't think that runs a modern OpenWRT. That was supported for over 12 years with modern kernel releases. And somehow we need to encourage the industry to upgrade their operating systems on a more regular basis than they do.
So Dave, real quick. So you were talking to us over Starlink, which is a fun fact, and should Starlink be doing something it's not doing yet? Are they hip to this? I kind of have to know the answer. Starlink, I need it from you.
Well, we had a wonderful show regarding Starlink about 2 years ago where they had the buffer bloat problem, and they still do. However, they are making progress, and by and large, they're doing better than the 5G industry and the cable industry. But they're still running 5 to 7 years behind where OpenWRT is. And it's an amazing service, guys. I use it on the boat. It can be used on anywhere. It's fantastic, and I can have this conversation to you live via satellite, and have it mostly work most of the time, and have a decent frame rate.
Yeah, it is very impressive. I was going to ask you about Starlink actually, but Doc's kind of beating me to it there, which is no problem. So you mentioned, but let's talk about music then, because that's the kind of elephant in the room a little bit, isn't it? You had the bass there. You mentioned you mentioned in your email we were talking about the whole idea of remote kind of jamming, recording, all that sort of stuff with people. You mentioned Jack Trip. Which is a really interesting project. Have you used it much? What do you think of it?
This is another one of those cases where I worked on something so long ago. I worked on Jack Trip and Ardor in the 2000s, and it's taken this long for the technology to become accessible to mere mortals. So I honestly, because I'm talking to you live via satellite, have not actually had a chance to use Jack Trip since it came out. It started being developed during COVID for very good reason. And it's based on code that's a decade old, and I'm told it just works. Farplay is another one. They're not open source, but they've done a really good job of making it possible for 2 or more musicians to collaborate. So I strongly encourage any musicians on the call to give both of those things a shot, and see how much further we can go with it. It's lonely being. How often do you get a chance to play with somebody else, Dan?
It's a good question. Not much lately. No. Yeah.
You know how boring it is to play bass by myself.
Yeah. There's only so many bass solos you can really do, isn't there? Before people start getting I know what you mean. I mean, I've only had a little go with Jack Trip, but I want to give it a go. Would it work over something like Starlink, or is the buffering too much or the latency too high?
The jitter and latency are far too high, and this is one of those things like where people's standards for how the internet should function are kind of too low. When you have a CD, how many glitches, how many scratches per song can you tolerate on a regular basis?
On a playlist, you mean, or?
If you have a song and it has a scratch in it, can you tolerate that? Would you stop playing the song because it had a scratch in it? One error?
Possibly. It depends. The errors could be deliberate. If it's Grandmaster Flash or something, then I wouldn't be worried if it was scratching. That's a different kind of scratching.
As a musician and as a person, that one scratch, that one error in the song just jars me. So I want to aim for perfection. And when you're making music with someone, and any level of interruption really gets under my skin. There's a story, Harrison Bergeron by Kurt Vonnegut, where he talks about smart people getting artificially dumbed down by things blasting in their ear periodically. And I just feel all the distractions, when you want to get that perfect focus, that perfect concert, every note for note, for 2 hours long, utterly immersive. A single false note or scratch is tremendously distracting. And so our standards for the internet are not anywhere near as high. We're used to the frame rate going to hell. We're used to the voice going to hell. When we're trying to make quality music, it helps to have a good fiber connection today, and to be trying to play across town and to not have any other traffic traversing the link.
Yeah, that makes sense. Did you? I'm thinking of like, because we're talking about Starlink and playing with people remotely. Do you remember? I think it may have even been about 10 years ago now. Chris Hadfield, when he was on the International Space Station, did a song with Bare Naked Ladies, and they were in, I don't know, NASA somewhere, and he was on the International Space Station, and somehow they made that work. And I remember at the time thinking, if they can do that, why can I still 10 years later not play effectively with somebody down the road when he's in space? So
yeah, it would be great if that technology had made it to Earth. He also did a great version of Space Oddity as well. Really inspiring stuff to see the guitar in space going, rotating in free fall and stuff. So yeah, it is. We actually, one of the very first demonstrations of of satellite technology in the 1960s is that they put on a 24-hour round-the-world concert that ended with a John Lennon tune, I think. I'd have to go looking that up. And it worked! So we had the technology for musicians to collaborate worldwide if we just focused on consistent latency and less dropouts. A musician can cope with consistent latency, but not with someone wandering in and out, except it's a special effect.
You mentioned about Jack Trip kind of coming out of the COVID pandemic a little bit, and do you think that boosted the demand or the development in this area? Because for a while, none of us could go anywhere. We were all separated. We all wanted to play remotely. Do you think that gave it a shot in the arm, and not to make a pun?
I certainly did. And again, I would point you at the Far Play guys more. Jack Trip is newer. The Far Play folk were first. They also ripped out a lot more latency. And you look at some of the interviews of the work that they did in bringing together some really first-class jazz musicians in particular in this environment. And look at the guys smiling. There is just something about being a musician that you can't just play for yourself. You have to play with each other and for an audience in order for the it's like 1 + 1 + 1 = infinity when it comes to making good music. So
yeah, definitely. It's all about collaboration and bouncing ideas off of the, well, I mean, in keeping with free software, open source, that's what the whole thing is. We're all bouncing ideas off each other and collaborating.
That's a great analogy. I feel strongly that music and open source people go together like butter and bread. We just the natural aspects of making something bigger than yourself and coping with your flaws. Like, for example, I'm actually a pretty terrible bass player. I'm primarily a piano player. A piano doesn't fit on my boat.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to pick up the bass, and it's so wonderful to have a better musician take a few minutes out and show me a riff, and so that's how you make that sound. And you want to use a Pink Floyd reference. It wasn't until I actually stood backstage at a Floyd concert that I understood that a certain sound being made by one of the songs was actually the combination of an electric piano and the bass on two slightly different notes. I'd always wondered deeply what that was, and it wasn't until I actually saw what they did that I understood how that really interesting tone was made. So there's so much learning that can be done by us getting back together more. I love the post-COVID environment's been pretty good. I've been busking a little bit. Just to talk to people. It's really cool. People will come up and talk to you. It's
Did you do that in Half Moon Bay or where?
Yeah, I'm currently doing it right in front of the restaurant here. I made $4 last weekend.
In Half Moon Bay, am I right that that's where you are? I mean, the last I saw you was in Santa Barbara, so I don't know.
Yeah, the boat and I are stuck in Half Moon Bay presently. It's a really good musical town. It's horribly foggy this time of year, but it's fun. I'm just curious, Dan, do you get out and busk? How are you expressing yourself musically?
There's a open mic night nearby, which is cool, in an arts center near us. So I go there quite often when I can. which is cool. I'm not currently in a band, unfortunately. I was, but then all the COVID stuff, again, that kind of made that difficult. Maybe I should have been looking at Jack Trip more or one of these things at the time. I don't know. So yeah, I tend to do that kind of stuff. But it's really cool. And they do music lessons as well at the Arts Centre. So I try and help out a bit if I can, if I know how to do something.
I know a lot of people that offered music lessons over Zoom, and they were all pretty universally frustrated by the native latency of Zoom. And I pointed everyone I could at the Far Play and Jack Trip projects to make teaching music better. So
I mean, so you mentioned Zoom because obviously we're talking on Zoom right now, of course. Yeah, you mentioned in your email about the whole there's the controversy at the moment about Zoom and AI and all that kind of stuff.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I know I've taken a swerve there on subjects, but yeah, you had some thoughts or anything you wanted to say about that potentially? I mean, it's up to you.
Well, what do you guys already know about that whole controversy? It's fairly recent.
It is recent, yeah. So I did do some looking up today because I knew there was I heard about the AI. So the change of their user agreement, user license agreement, terms and conditions to allow training of AI to use your, voice and text and so on, and presumably video, I don't know, to train an AI. And the agreement now, if you sign it, gives your agreement to that, was what happened, or what they were changing. And then there was a big outcry about it. People were saying, what if I don't want my private conversations to be recorded or analyzed by some computer somewhere? Well, I don't know. At the moment, I'm not sure what. So when I read, is if the operator of the call agrees to that, everybody on the call is agreed. Your only option is to not be on the call if you're not the manager of the call.
Yeah, it really makes me twitch. This is where I would have a flight to FLOSS in particular. I do not. So I've worked occasionally on a wonderful open source video conferencing system called Galen.org. And you get your own server, you get your own copy of the code, and you can do whatever you want as the owner of the machine and of the code that your participants agree to. But here we have a third party saying, oh, by the way, we're going to snoop on your private conversation, teach an AI about stuff, and tough if you don't use it. So I would so love to see a massive flight back to video conferencing servers that give some guarantee of privacy. It's a virtual room that I am sharing with your entire audience, but a lot of times I don't want to do that. I just want to, I have a whole lot of really great private conversations with Len Kleinrock and Matt Mathis, for example. We're not ready to publish. We are making serious progress on a unified queue theory, and we don't want anyone to know. I mean, we have to deal with patents and stuff like that. So any level of information leakage from an otherwise secure system, no, I don't. I'm going to go run Galen. Anyone on this show that cares about their personal privacy going forward, the biggest provider in the world has said that they're going to be snooping on your calls. No, go get your own.
Okay, I need to say that there's some recent news that they've backed off on that and are explaining it differently. It's not a finished controversy, but there's more to go into there. So we'll get back to that after I let everybody know that this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Discourse, the online home for your community. For over a decade, Discourse has made it their mission to make the internet a better place for online communities. By harnessing the power of discussion, real-time chat, and AI, Discourse makes it easy to have meaningful conversations and collaborate with your community anytime and anywhere. Would you like to create a community? Visit discourse.org/twit to get 1 month free on all self-serve plans. Trusted by some of the largest companies in the world, Discourse is open source and powers more than 20,000 online communities. Whether you're just starting out or want to take your community to the next level, there's a plan for you. A basic plan for a private invite-only community, a standard plan, if you want unlimited members and a public presence, a business plan for active customer support communities. Jonathan Balava, developer advocacy lead at Twitch, says Discourse is the most amazing thing we've ever used. We have never experienced software so reliable ever. One of the biggest advantages to creating your own community with Discourse is that you own your data. You will always have access to all your conversation history, and Discourse will never sell your data to advertisers. Discourse gives you everything you need in one place. Make Discourse the online home for your community. Visit discourse.org/twit to get 1 month free on all self-serve plans. That's discourse.org/twit. Okay. I want to be careful because the story about Zoom is an ongoing one. Historically, by the way, a few years ago, I think it was early pandemic. I'm locating it by when it was in time, and I'm looking through all the too many tabs I have open here. But I suddenly were getting 25,000 visits because I really busted them hard for their privacy policy, which basically, and it was really the one that applied to their website, which, by the way, had almost nothing on it because it was all promotional. It was not, I mean, nobody went there for anything but a brochure, basically. But on that, they had pretty much the pro forma privacy policy that all lawyers trying to obey the letter of the GDPR while utterly messing with its spirit. I'm euphemizing here. And they backtracked a lot on that. And apparently, and I had a long conversation with their CEO, Eric Yuan, who seemed like Yuan, I think, who seems like a really nice guy. And, sounded sincere about wanting to protect the privacy of its users, and said that what they did when you're using Zoom is very different than what they did with their website. They're going to fix the website. And I don't remember how that all came out, except they did change some things. And they did change that privacy policy to something less onerous, if not non-onerous. I don't remember. In this case, they're saying, I believe, and I can't find the open tab where they say it, it's an Axios story, that they, by default, they are not training AI on conversations that are happening over Zoom. And so I just invite listeners to go look that up because I don't have a link to it. And if we can find one, we'll put it in the show notes. But there is, I don't think they're being idle sitting there, but it's a tough one. I mean, right now, I don't know to what extent they're keeping up with the Joneses on this, or just, as so many companies are doing, so many everything are doing, just relying on AI for everything they possibly can. That's it. I see we have it up on screen now for those watching. So maybe where we could go with it is this, Dave and Dan too. In a world where more and more we are depending on AI to do our understanding for us, to comprehend our lives. Last week, I think we were talking about music, as a matter of fact, on that show, and that guest, Damian Reel, talked about how AI has been used, and he uses AI in law and in the legal profession, all for good, I would say. But I would love to apply AI to everything in this room, and I'd show the spines of all those books and tell me what's in them, and maybe cross-reference with all my receipts and see who I paid for what. There's so many ways I can improve my life or have my life improved if I had my own AI. I think every company wants to improve what they do, but how much of this is keeping up with the Joneses? How much of it is actually needing this stuff? And how much is getting the cart way out in front of the horses and the world going to hell? And I'm just, so take that any direction you want.
So you're asking me, or
I'm asking you both, but you're the guest. You go first.
Okay. It really makes my blood boil. Honestly, I Let me give you an example. Someone asked ChatGPT 4 about me, which is really cool. And it summarized my accomplishments from multiple places, which is pretty good. And then towards the end it said, unfortunately, Dave Taht died in 2020, leaving behind a substantial body of work. It actually wrote that. So it's when it falls into fantasy, and we are depending on this to I don't know, manage our cars or our lives or our accountants, or say, by the way, if you combine these two chemicals, they won't kill you. It needs to be truthful, and it needs to be trained on data that is truthful. And honestly, if you're trolling the web for the last 14 years, you aren't going to find that. If I could find an AI that was trained on, for example, the entire output of Sci-Hub, all the scientific papers of the world, and then made to reject 20% that are completely wrong. And maybe, I don't know, 1980s Usenet, and maybe a ton of other really great books that we know to be truthful. Then I would have a lot more confidence that we were going to move forward. But right now, it seems to be just that particular aspect of it just makes my blood boil. You can't trust it. So that's the first part. I love that it allows you to, it has improved my writing. I have a unique style that it improves. It has improved the coding in the LibreQOS project. It requires adult supervision. So in moving back to the Zoom controversy, though, I wanted to make the stress on the FLOSS side is that it's very hard to trust in third parties. And I would like us very much in the video conferencing world to get back control of our conferencing tools and allow us as the actual owner to have faith and trust that we aren't sharing information with parties we don't want to, and train our own bloody models. I don't want Siri, for example. I'd like my own personal assistant, virtual name, say Athena, something like that, who I can trust with my secrets, and help navigate a very difficult and complicated world for me. Maybe we'll get closer to that point with enough pushback.
So one reason that why Siri is, I think, really, really dumb is that it's actually not much trained on our data and is detached from any back end, or at least they say it is. But I think, I mean, I this is my supposition, but I think it's true that the problem with ChatGPT, and for that matter, Bard, and I suppose Llama as well, I don't know how it is trained. Bard is trained the same way, is that it's looking at the entire internet since 1995, and there's so much that's wrong in there, and it's making stuff up. I mean, I've been amazed at how, I'm glad they got you wrong, except for the part where you died.
Coming to you from beyond the grave.
I know. It's like, yeah, rumors of my death are slightly exaggerated, right? Or as I think it was William Cowper said, to a newspaper that reported his death, he says, "If you reported my death, I will cancel my subscription." But I'm wondering, well, two things. First is, what is your conferencing, open source conferencing system or approach of preference? Is it Jitsi or one of the others? And we've had them on here before. And what, I mean, have you played with Llama or any of the open source AIs that, I know Llama is a special case because it's coming from Facebook and it does have some restrictions. It's not a wide open license, but you can do a lot with it. And so I'm wondering if on both those fronts, conferencing and AI, if you have any preferences.
So I adopted Galen early by the way, you absolutely should have the author of Galen, and maybe also the author is Julius Krobacek, and he speaks 4 languages. He's brilliant. He's entertaining, and you should definitely have him on your show. He wrote it, like most FLOSS software, in anger. and because Jitsi was so overcomplicated, and he said, I can do this better. And then he started developing it, did it for his own courses, and it's been more and more adopted around the world. The Pion library it depends upon was one of the better congestion control algorithms in the world. And the Pion library got adopted by Twitch. So through that wonderful seed crystal of what went into Galen, we have a lower latency video conferencing system. It's all open source that a normal person can build in about 10 minutes. And deploy. Like I could get it, I could get it running for you, Doc, in your basement in 10 minutes, and you suddenly would be running your own code. There's a couple other open source conferencing systems besides Jitsi. There's another one. I gotta say, right now, I'm really just fond of where Galen is and where it's going. What was your other question, Doc? You had a second one.
Oh, your preferred AI. I mean, the video conferencing is one, but AI is the other.
AI.
Is there an AI you're using privately? I mean, on your own.
Yeah. So I do hope that the future is you have your own private AI, and that it digests your data and just your data and has a good data set. So no, I am, after a brief, very sexy exploration and curiosity exploring this stuff, I had my Alvin Toffler moment. Have you read Future Shock? You've heard the term, I'm sure. But remember?
Oh,
Future
yeah,
Shock?
sure, yeah. Written about him. He's sadly gone, but yeah.
I got so fed up into this potential future that I just got on the next plane to Nicaragua and logged out. I put my phone down, grabbed my guitar, sat on a beach, and I figured I would watch the singularity happen from a safe distance. So no. How about you? So you are using it yourself? Dan, are you using it? Is anybody in the chat using it?
I haven't used it, no. I have used Jitsi quite a lot. We used to use, we still use Jitsi when we were doing, during the pandemic, we had online only Linux user group meetings. And we did those with Jitsi. Cool. And yeah, it worked pretty well. But I didn't know about Galen, so I'm going to look at that. Because, I do like Jitsi. It's great, but I wouldn't be averse to trying something else if that's out there.
Great. If I get one more user of Galen through this call, it'd be great. It's Go build. It's one line. It's all pure Go. The biggest and longest period of time is actually getting a certificate to use for an official external use. And it's missing a few needed features still. It's open source. I hope more people lean in to improve it.
Yeah, it's a for those listening, which is most of you. It's at galene.org, like it sounds, galen.org.
Yeah. But if I can strongly recommend you have Julius and Sean on one of your calls, you'll have a really entertaining conversation.
If you have their emails, send them to us, and we'd love to have them on. And since this is our 745th show, it's not entirely possible that we haven't had him on. I mean, it's quite possible we've had him on in the past.
We need our own AI trained on our own.
I know. Exactly. I want an AI. That would be so handy.
I strongly agree that mining our own personal experiences, mining our own email for stuff that we said or people that we met, and finding new ways of, I'm getting old. I used to be able to remember, tens of thousands of email addresses. And these days I can't. And I'm very glad for autocomplete. But even then, I can't remember who had the attribute of who I was looking for. So if I could somehow express that I need a guy, I need a drummer. Oh, Lord, give me a drummer. And then, boom, have it come out of my email. Everyone that I knew that sort of might be a drummer. And the odds are.
If you need drumming on a table, I could give you that. Or a trash can, I could give you that.
Cool. I have a wonderful recording of Bruce Schneier, the cryptographer, playing drums with us one night. It was a really beautiful and magical.
He's good, huh? He's a good drummer.
He's really good, and the crowd that we had there that night was really rocking. I should put out an album, Bruce Schneier exits cryptography.
We have some questions queued up, especially on Dan's side, and we'll get to those after this. Okay, so Dan,
Yeah, thanks, Doc. So, yeah, we've been talking a bit about running your own code and stuff, which is obviously a subject close to our heart on this show, and privacy and all that kind of stuff. I was reading, Dave, about your involvement with fighting the FCC over the right to run third-party code on routers and so on. And I wanted to ask you a bit about, and this is probably, I hope this isn't, a traumatic subject for you, but why is it, do you think, that they're so keen to stop us from running code other than what they've distributed? I mean,
that was the biggest political thing I've ever done in my life. I lost a lot of sleep and organized hundreds of people to sign that letter and the publicity. And we knocked down the FCC that time with a single shot. I am mighty when roused, like an ant. My urge, however, to have a political battle like that ever again, somebody younger can take it. So to try to circle back, at the time, there was some really strong arguments regarding how secure things could be if only you trusted in the manufacturer. And we've pointed out that the manufacturers are tending to ship 7 and 9 and 10-year-old code nowadays, and the only manufacturers that are doing a good job here are, for example, Eero makes really great routers. So does everything derived from OpenWRT, but the tail end of the market is shipping insecure, horrible crap, and this includes the kind of gear that ISPs tend to buy because it's slightly cheaper. So less than this mistaken attempt to stop us from innovating and stop us from having control over our own hardware. We really, really, really need to see the kind of ethics you see in Android and in iPhone in protecting the end user from their own devices. I would so love to see the FCC go the other direction, and the FTC. Devices must be updated within 30 days of a CVE. Period. Or we pull your license to build that product, to build any products in the United States. That one idea, or we actually offered a level of consumer protection, would build back the American embedded software industry. It would probably save money because all the enormous exploits and theft you see going on because of all the holes would go away. And I would just hope that if we just recognize that our doorbells and our firewalls are the ways that the bad guys are getting in today, and that the only way to do that is ensure that stuff gets reliably updated and ideally is open source so we can fix it, it gets more currency.
It's funny because you mentioned there that they should have the system where if there's a security flaw, then the manufacturer is responsible for responding to that. But funnily, it's the opposite argument that they seem to make towards us. They say the reason we can't let you run, open source software or an embedded firmware is you could run anything and it's insecure. And what about terrorism and all these other things that they throw at us? When actually, it's kind of the wrong way round. I mean, yes, the reason we're getting hacked is because we're running 10-year-old code, possibly.
Yeah, it's very Orwellian, that argument was. It didn't make a whole lot of sense except to naive people. We put out, I still wish people would read it, Vince Cerf and I and everybody put out a list of 5 things in a saner, I forget what it's called now, I can give you the link, but we put out what we thought would be 5 best practices for the entire embedded industry to be made to follow, which it definitely would increase the manufacturer's cost. But among other things, the user should actually be the one in charge of doing the updates, and they should have choice. Just like, for example, Android has the couple stores available for it. You can have the GPL store. But it should be the user's choice as to what they run and update, and the manufacturer's responsibility to make sure, at the very least, that the parts that they're responsible for do not have any ongoing security vulnerabilities. We're still not even close to that point. We have smart light bulbs. I won't buy a smart light bulb. Most of IoT is a sewer in terms of security. And Somehow we need to raise the bar and have the open source community participate in helping make civilization a safer and more secure place.
Excellent. Yeah, I totally agree. In keeping with the whole networking side of things and the technical side, is part of that challenge reaching these kind of IoT devices, edge devices, updating them over the internet, over the air or something? Is that a connectivity issue, or do you think that's a personal user responsibility to some degree?
It's always cheaper to manufacture software once, to treat it like a hardware component and never touch it again. And of course, if you have a non-open source policy towards it, and you lose the programmer the programmer is now living under a bridge, you can't update it anymore, or you go out of business, and difficult problems. A national focus on this, on building software in America would be really great. I don't need to, it can be, this is something where I've been trying to, I have another proposal called an upgrade in place. We have a huge Buy American thing happening here, but it's like buying physical fibers here. And yet all of our software making and manufacture is mostly all overseas, and we don't have any control over it. If we could somehow move at least building the software to here, and then applying standards for software bill of materials, as well as CVEs, and a few needed features like bufferbloat fixes, then we would have a chance to make real headway on securing the edges of our networks. And maybe we would have light bulbs I'd be willing to buy that were intelligent, and AIs that I could trust. I hope that we raise the bar here. Otherwise, I trust my phone pretty far.
As far as you can throw it. We have some questions queued up, actually on the fiber topic, and we'll get to that right after this. Okay, so Dave, you have a piece up on your SearWort notebook, one of your blogs, titled "Sane Uses for Fiber." Now, I'm asking this in a town that has fiber from a private provider that kind of stalled, and it didn't go as far as they wanted it to. The city's doing it now, and that seems to be going somewhat slowly, although there's a QR code you can scan it from your driver's seat in the back, on the back of the buses. The city buses have a thing in the back with the QR code that says
"What fiber?"
And this for our fiber project. But I'm wondering, I think people project on fiber. I mean, it's not just fiber. There are these terms: speed, capacity, latency is your big thing. But I mean, I think with speed, like a highway may be capable of supporting up to 500 miles an hour, but nobody's going to do that. But I think that few people have an actual sense of how a network works. So fiber seems almost like, hey, this is ideal. I have infinite capacity. I'm not going to have any worries once that happens. And I did have fiber at only 25 megabits symmetrical from Verizon when I lived in Boston or near Boston. And it was the best I've had so far, I should say. I'm talking to you on a connection that's a cable connection, but it's almost a gig down and maybe 20 up. But it seems
yeah, your connection is quite good. I'm curious. I am on Starlink. I should have glitched a couple times over the course of this call. Has my video quality been good? Frame rate and stuff?
It's been good enough. I mean, the good thing is that most people listen to audio, they're not looking at you at all. And so when you freeze every few moments, it's cool.
Okay, so I'd like to set the stage backwards. So yes, fiber is better. Fiber is the best possible technology for distributing the internet that exists. Okay, it's also hilariously expensive. It is. We see it costing $8,000 or more per household, even in fairly dense areas, and you've seen it go a lot there. Running physical cables and maintaining them is really expensive. So in the context of that blog piece, it's a very nuanced conversation, okay? I've been having it for years. In the context of that blog piece, I didn't really extol what's been happening in the wireless world. We have tremendously wonderful wireless technology. 5G is beginning to work better and better. And there's all kinds of other, I mean, even Wi-Fi in less dense areas is perfectly adequate, if well managed, to provide all the service that most people need. You very rarely need more than 50 megabits of performance. In fact, very rarely need more than 25, unless you're a house with multiple Netflix users. So I wanted very much for us to be focusing on reducing the latency. And the best way I could use to describe it is you're in a small, how big is Bloomington?
80,000, but then he had 44,000 students.
Okay. So you had a reach. Yeah, so you have a reach of the fiber plant to all the important places in the city, places that have really big demand. That's good. And then you have people living on the edges of town, and maybe in the poorer parts that people have not run fiber to, in part because the monthly costs will be higher than just leveraging cellular. So my hope was in that piece was to point people at get fiber to the pole, offer open access so any ISP can also offer some kind of wireless extension to it, and bang, we'll have better internet. And if we can apply better standards to the wireless piece, we won't actually need to run fiber to every building to make it happen, which makes the manufacturers of fiber a little unhappy, but it will end up being a lower and actually more resilient system. When someone knocks down a pole or there's a power failure or lightning failure, fiber will fail. The nice thing about cellular is that you might have 2 or 3 towers within reach of you, and you automatically fail over to one. So I would like to see a hybrid fiber, higher speed wireless future more than I would like to see fiber to everyone's home. And I have been pilloried by the fiber fans by saying that. Fiber or bust. So I'm safely on my boat today. For those of you that don't think that you can have a quality wireless technology connection, Libre QoS project is reliably delivering 500 megabits, 200 megabits, 100 megabits or more. A lot of happy people who otherwise couldn't get fiber, and they've been waiting for decades.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One thing I wanted to ask about, Dave, is so in the UK, I'm in the UK, obviously. We have a bit of a problem in that, like, one company effectively controls the entire phone network, or traditionally the old copper network, which is now being brought to fiber, is British Telecom, or BT, which was part of the government, and then it got privatized in the 80s, and now it's BT. And although other companies are supposed to be able to compete and use the exchanges and all the rest of it, in my experience, they don't really get a chance to use the exchanges properly. They don't get the proper access. They all have to use OpenReach, which is a branch of BT, which is supposed to be a separate company, but it's a branch of BT. And so we have a problem here with lack of competition and so on. What's the situation like in the US?
Can I come? I said I had a friend of mine that just took a tour of Britain doing bufferbloat testing, and absolutely everywhere he went, it was measured in seconds. So one of my first suggestions for your entire country is to please plug a decent OpenWRT router into your connection and fix the bufferbloat, and then you'll stop being so bloody unhappy. I have a whole bunch of Virgin Media people that have all put the cake algorithm in front of it, and they're happy as heck. And so go to your hotel, your coffee shop, and make them be better, and you'll stop being so unhappy with the dominant provider. Going to my country, we have 3 big sets of monopolies. We have all the cable companies, and then we have AT&T, and then we have the itty bitty little wisps. So you have coverage that way. I'm always firmly on the side of the little guy, the little wisp, the guys that are extending out the edge of the internet, and I hoped that with the enormous influx of government money from the BEAD programs, which is $70 billion the federal government is giving to the states to build out the edge of the internet, that it doesn't wind up in the hands of all the big guys, but in the little guys that are trying to serve their small towns and communities and build community networks like Bloomington. I would love to see what's going on there blossom and flower. At the same time, running the internet is a complicated thing, and you got to get talented people to help you run even a small operation. So The future, to me, has a heck of a lot more wireless technology in it. And if we can make that work better, it would be great. Is that more or less an answer? I care a lot about expanding the internet all over the world. Been working with some folk in Africa. And you think you're suffering. 4 megabits is good there. So it's all relative. I also, while I'm going back in the post-COVID thing, I honestly really loved going to coffee shops and talking with people while using the internet. I liked it when the internet was more of a social thing. You used to get dressed up to go to a cyber cafe to play in a LAN party. I think that running it to every home and giving it as I can't even call it an opiate of the masses, the internet to the home. I'd call it what would you call it? PCP for the masses. It's designed to make people angry now. And get outside, grab a guitar, check your email once in a while. Get offline, enjoy the universe.
It's a good point. You mentioned, I should correct myself because I said there was only one company, and somebody in the chat mentioned as well, there is Virgin Media, which is a cable company in the UK. I don't live in a cable area, so that's why I forgot about it. But I was wrong that there's only one company. But there's not a lot of competition, or not as much as there should be. You mentioned wireless technology and the role that has to play. I was really interested when 4G was first becoming a thing. One of the big test beds was in Malawi, in Africa, I believe, where they had really fast at the time, 4G connections, and they were pushing technology there, which is really interesting. So do you think that the future, you mentioned the whole fiber thing, of course, and that's a big goal, but do you think in the future a lot of us will be just using wireless stuff?
I think, have you ever had Bob Frankson on the show? He's the guy that coined the term ambient connectivity.
I wanted to have him on the show. I don't want to insult him here. He's less of an open source guy than we usually have. But he's very friendly to it. But but I'd love to have him on. He's he's a great guy, and he's a friend as well. So
his concept of ambient connectivity is something that we will ultimately get to. You'll be wirelessly connected to something pretty much all the time for whatever positive or negative things. I have a friend of mine, piano player, really good. This is a side note, who carries around little Wi-Fi detectors on his body because he's a bit of a tin hat in this regard. And he requires that everybody around him turn off their phones. And those detectors are incredibly sensitive. I would like it if more people were aware of how much wireless was around on that. Anyway, that's kind of an aside. We'll have ambient connectivity everywhere. And if we can find some ways of making the friction of switching between, for example, Virgin Media and British Telecom and the local telephone operator. We've made a lot of progress in the cellular world of being able to switch transparently from Wi-Fi to 5G technologies. That's what I wanted to get to. Okay, so the whole telco industry will tell you it was 4G. It was 4G, and now it's 5G. It's 5G. And there's, in the WISP world, starting with really good quality Wi-Fi gear, there are so many other technologies in 5G that are almost in general superior to the 5G approach. There's a company called Tirana in particular, and there's a competitor or two to them, that is making a non-line of sight wireless work past 200 megabits. So you just stick up an antenna and it pretty much goes anywhere. And we have the wireless technologies to cheaply and easily deploy a much more resilient internet, especially if we stop listening to the big guys tell us that 5G will solve everything and look at the little smaller companies that are delivering stuff on different spectrum that is working really amazingly well.
So I wanted to, some here might remember, it's now 21 years ago, but I wrote about it and I stuck it on our own little private chat in Linux Journal. in September of 2002. I was in the UK, as I was often back then. And by the way, I consulted BT for 6 years and on open source for what that was worth. But anyway, that was later. But there was this really great thing called war chalking, because in the earliest days of Wi-Fi, and people having a constant connection to the net, they would share their Wi-Fi. There was not a sense of security, and I'm trying to remember his name. It's bothering me. I can't. I'm trying to look it up. He invented this thing called war chalking. It was where people would carry a piece of chalk with them, and they would, when they found an open Wi-Fi hotspot, they had a code for writing on the, what was the name of this link and of this hotspot on the ground, on the chalk there. And there was a thing called consume.net. It was completely organic. It was just people in London primarily who would mark where their hotspots were, and you had a map of London. You could zoom in on it, know where the hotspot was near you. It was really cool. And similar things happened in New York around that time. I had a long series of pieces in Linux Journal on that are worth revisiting, because it was a kind of golden age of Wi-Fi. You could have your laptop open in the back of a cab and find dozens at any moment in time of open hotspots you could get onto. And Nicholas Negroponte of the media center at MIT compared it to putting a flower box on your window, and that Wi-Fi should be public in the same way as streetlights are public. And of course, they turned it into a security issue, and you can't do that. But it was
those were the good old days. They really were.
They were good old days, and they passed really fast.
Well, I still, because I trust my software and my routers, still run an open guest SSID. I'm sharing it with the boat next door. There's no skin off. There's no skin off my back to share where I radiate, and I would love to see that come back, where we've had reasonable assurances that sharing wasn't going to hurt us. I mean, think of the sexual revolution before HIV. Well, it's secured now, so yeah, you can have a guest network and go share again. There's another group called Open Wi-Fi, sponsored by the TIP project, which is also trying to federate your account, so you'll be able to log into one screen once and be able to share it with anyone else that's federating. Comcast kind of does that too. So maybe we can bring open Wi-Fi back.
So I just put this on. War chalking is spelled like it is, war and then chalking. It's in Wikipedia, and and Matt Jones is the guy who designed it, and it was so cool because I ran into him at a great pub called Garlic and Shots in Soho in London, and it was a bunch of great people that were just in all around that in the UK at that time, long ago. Anyway, great stuff. We are pretty much at the end of the show, guys. So Dave, is there anything you wish we'd asked and we hadn't, and you want to get to and can tell us really fast before we're out?
Could I do a quick little plug for an organization whose practices I love? So recently, LibreQOS, which has got over 200,000 subscribers now, we're shooting from tens of millions, got a small grant from NLNet. And NLNet has been a wonderful supporter of free and open source for over 40 years. And their process for applying for anyone else doing FLOSS is incredibly simple, and their procedure for approval is very quick. And I so wish more organizations followed their model. I've been deeply appreciative of their support for over 10 years. And anyone else in their show needs just a little nudge, a little help with their work in putting something in open source. Please give them a shot.
And we'll put those, both of those, Libre QoS and they're libreqos.io and nlnet.nl in the show notes. So
thank you.
Readers and clickers out there. So Dave, we always close with something you've answered before. The answer might be different now. What is your favorite text editor and scripting language?
Cool. I remember having two funny answers last time. My answer has not changed much in that I still use Emacs, and you can make everything fit Emacs. The very first way I used ChatGPT is I spent hours and hours making it work in Emacs rather than using anything else. So I still do that. As for scripting language, I joked last time about it basically being C, and it still really is. Shell is my big thing. I just mostly shell. So thank you for asking those questions again. Maybe in a few years that'll change.
Yeah, and I'm reading more things on our back channels. I've had more windows open on this than I've had in any other show so far, and I hope productively. So thanks so much for being on the show, Dave.
Yes.
We will have you back again, as we always do, apparently.
I would love to keep coming back.
Not that far. Enough happens in the meantime, and an hour is too short. So we'll make it happen. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me again.
So Dan, how was that for you, man?
Oh, great. Yeah. It was really nice to talk to Dave. I mean, we could have talked for ages, of course, about so much stuff. I'm sure so much of the stuff. And we had a little joke in our back channel here in the IRC. Ant was saying, because I'm British, I said router. I said this was a router. And I know you Americans call it a router. So I apologize. I should
don't apologize. You know, we don't keep things on schedule, and it's fine.
Yeah. So So if you were wondering what I was talking about on the show as you were listening, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
Love having you on, Mr. Lynch. Love having you on.
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
definitely.
Okay. So, do you want to plug anything, Dan, quick before we get to next week?
Not really. I mean, very quickly, just go and check out. We've talked about community and so on, and sharing with open source projects. Go and check out your local Linux user group if you have one, or check out what's going on around there. And you can find these things online.
Lugs are good.
Live, love, and prosper.
You can be your lug nut at yours, except they're all nuts in their own special ways.
Yeah.
So next week we have Claude Warren Jr. He's with Ivan.io, and look that up if you want. AIVEN.io. For some reason I'm clicking on it. It's not coming up at the second, but it will be. Oh, it is coming up really big, and I can't. Fully managed open source, and it went away. So you do it yourself. Anyway, it's going to be great. It'll be next week. And so until then, I'm Doc Searls. This is FLOSS Weekly. See you then.
Hey, we should talk Linux. It's the operating system that runs the internet, a bunch of game consoles, cell phones, and maybe even the machine on your desk. But you already knew all that. What you may not know is that TWiT now has a show dedicated to it, the Untitled Linux Show. Whether you're a Linux pro, a burgeoning sysadmin, or just curious what the big deal is, you should join us on the Club TWiT Discord every Saturday afternoon for news, analysis, and tips to sharpen your Linux skills. And then make sure you subscribe to the Club TWiT exclusive Untitled Linux Show. Wait, you're not a Club TWiT member yet? Well, go to twit.tv/clubtwit and sign up. Hope to see you there.